The year before I went to medical school, I had a job in a hospital in Minneapolis. And in the basement of the hospital was the hospital morgue, and that's where I worked. And my job was to help out at autopsies. Somebody would die in the hospital, and I helped the pathologist do the exam. And one day a guy died in the hospital of a massive heart attack, probably from eating hospital food, but that's another story. Anyway, so we had to examine the body, and the pathologist knew that I was going to be going to medical school, so he made sure I saw everything. And he took a scalpel and he opened up the chest, and then he cut a whole section of ribs off the chest and put it on the table, and that exposed the heart. And he sliced open one of the coronary arteries, and he said, "Look inside." And it looked just like rusty pipes. He said, "That's atherosclerosis." And he looked in the carotid arteries going to the brain, and he said, "There it is again." And it's this narrowing of the arteries, and he said, "You know, that's your bacon and eggs, Neal, that's what does that." Anyhow, the end of the exam, he finishes up, he writes up his notes, systemic atherosclerosis, acute myocardial infarct, da-da-da-da. I was left to clean up the body. And so I put the ribs back in the chest, and I sewed up the skin. And when I was done, I went up to the cafeteria to see what there was to eat. And in the cafeteria line, they were serving ribs. And I looked at it, and it looked exactly like the ribs that I had just been working on. And it smelled like it. And I thought, this is just like a body. And I realized, wait a minute, this is a body. So I didn't become a vegetarian on the spot, but I knew I wasn't going to eat that. And as time went on, I then started medical school, and one thing led to another. And I just realized the animals had to get off my plate, and that's what happened. When people talk about things maybe changing, for me, sort of nothing has changed. And that's the way I want it. Because when I was 20 years old, I felt good, I felt healthy. And to be able to feel that way when you're 30 and 40 and 50 and 60 it's a good thing, because for most people, they don't have that luxury. They gain weight. Their cholesterol levels come up, they acquire medications, and they lose energy. So if nothing happens, that's what we're looking for. Well, there's all kinds of reasons, and different reasons mean different things to different people. I think, frankly, as a doctor, what I know about is health. And so when it comes to diabetes or heart disease or preventing cancer, there's nothing like having a diet that's based on the bounty of plants. Our environmentalist friends all tell us that the earth is eventually not going to be here anymore, at least not as we know it today, if we don't make some pretty big changes, and that means vegan too. But I have to say, in anything we do, whether it's as a doctor or just as a human being, ethics have to underlie what we do. And the idea of first do no harm is something that every medical student thinks about. And if in our diet we are slaughtering 1 million animals every hour so that you can have a certain taste, you've got to be a pretty hard-hearted person to not let those ethical issues come into your thinking at some point. Well, here at the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, ever since 1985, we have been strongly encouraging everybody to know about the advantages of a plant-based diet. And going vegan is great in so many ways. If a person wants to lose weight, if they want to knock out diabetes, if they want to get off their medicines or reduce them, this is really the way to go. So what we do is we do research studies to see what works and to document it, and to see how to do it in the best possible way. And then we have educational programs, whether they're in-person classes, whether they're in the media, whether they're on Zoom, or all the new ways that we have to communicate that we didn't have way back when we got started. We use all of those things. And once in a while, we go into court, and we fight against the government or fight against industry to try to make sure that good health and good sense prevail. Getting the meat group out of dietary guidelines, I think, was a big one. There used to be a meat group, and it was there in the pyramid. When the pyramid first debuted in 1991, there was a meat group. It was smaller than the vegetable group, but it was there. And we said, you got to get rid of that. And we ended up filing lawsuits against the U.S. government to fight about this kind of thing. Well, in 2011, the U.S. government issued my plate. And what you discover is there's a vegetable group, and there's a fruit group, and there's a grain group, and there's a protein group, which could be meat, but it could also be tofu or beans or nuts, and it doesn't have to be meat. So I think getting rid of the meat group was a big step forward. There have been many others. Back not that many years ago, people didn't realize that a plant-based diet, along with a healthy lifestyle, could reverse heart disease. We now know that's true, and that's the work of Dr. Dean Ornish and Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, and many others doing just brilliant work in this area. Our work has extended that to diabetes and weight problems and more recently menopausal symptoms and all the things that are bothering people. Practically, it seems that a plant-based diet can play a big role. At so many hospitals, you have the same scenario that people complain about. You know, you're just recovering from your heart attack or whatever it is, and then they bring you the bacon and eggs for breakfast. Everybody wants to see that change. The patients want it changed, their families want it changed, the staffers want it changed, and the doctor who's trying to keep you out of the hospital and prevent you from coming back, they want that changed too. So the American Medical Association back in 2017 said that hospitals should be serving plant-based meals. And hospitals have been kind of slow to integrate that, but they're getting there. And a great many have already done this, and some have done it really beautifully. And any hospital who's interested, the Physicians Committee has recipes, has lots of information, has signs that you can put around, and we're glad to talk to you about it. If you have a connection with a hospital, you can go to them directly and you can say to them, why don't you have plant-based meals? You know, they want to keep the customer happy. So that's kind of number one, is going to them and asking for what you want. But a person can always go to us too, and we're happy to provide materials. When we do research studies here, you have to make sure that you do them very, very carefully for a couple of reasons. One is you want to know the truth. You want to do your research with integrity. Secondly, other people want to make sure that it's true too. And so you have to make sure that the reviewers and the journals and the readers all respect what you've done. An example would be in 2003, the NIH gave us a grant to test a vegan diet versus a conventional diet for diabetes, type 2 diabetes. We brought in 99 people, split them into two groups. One was the conventional diabetes diet, if I can use that word. The other was a completely plant-based, low-fat diet. And we tracked both groups. Both groups got lots of support. They met every single week with dietitians who were believers in their diets, and they got a huge amount of support. We tracked the results very, very carefully, and at the end of the study, both groups did well. The conventional diet had a drop in hemoglobin A1C, which is the main measure of blood sugar control. They had a good drop in that, about 0.4 absolute percentage points. That was the control group. But the vegan group had a drop that was 3 times bigger, 1.2 absolute percentage points, which is enormous. And that changed everything. And the American Diabetes Association published that finding in 2006. And then we had longer-term findings published later. And it's really changed the world of diabetes. And now we have very solid evidence that a plant-based diet is integral to not just getting your blood sugar down, but to reversing the causes of this disease. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of studies that contribute to the conclusion that a plant-based diet is absolutely the best way to go. Whether you're looking at cardiovascular disease, and Dean Ornish's work and Caldwell Esselstyn's work are really just pivotal in my view. And then if you look at the contributors to it, weight loss, if you look at blood pressure, the studies that show that a plant-based diet helps with these are terrific. And the way you do studies is you start off with observational studies. People who just self-select. Are their cholesterol levels lower if they're vegan? Is their blood pressure lower if they're vegan? Is their diabetes, is it less likely to occur if they're vegan? And the answer to all those questions is yes. But then that's observational. Those are self-selected people. So you need to put it to a more rigorous test. And that's a randomized trial. And so you bring in people and maybe they have diabetes and you test the diet against a good control. You see how they do. And we have those studies now. And then eventually you take all the studies in a particular area and you can put them together in a systematic review and see if the results are consistent. And we've got that. We have that for cholesterol. We have that for diabetes. We have that for weight issues. We have that for blood pressure. It's all been published in peer-reviewed journals. And now, if you're a physician, either you are vegan or you just haven't read the literature. There are a lot of sort of diet wars out there, the carnivores against the vegans and so forth. But my work isn't really to try to convince a dyed-in-the-wool carnivore advocate that he or she should give up those ideas. Some of these people have ideas for reasons that are not related to logic. Our audience is for people who are open-minded and want to get healthier or eat a more compassionate diet or more environmentally friendly diet or whatever, and are interested in the facts. And we don't try to arm wrestle with people who are off on one of the other rings of Saturn. In our studies, we've compared a standard diabetes diet to a vegan diet. We've compared a vegan diet to a Mediterranean diet. We've compared a vegan diet to lower fat omnivore diets and that kind of thing. We haven't done a vegan diet versus the carnivore diet or something like that. And we wouldn't do that because it's unethical to bring in sick people and randomize them to a diet that's going to hurt them more. People have said, why don't you study a keto diet or something like that? We would not ethically do that. Is a meaty diet as viable as a plant-based diet? No, no way. Research shows very clearly that people who get lured into meat eating have higher risk of cancer. They've got a higher risk of diabetes. They've got a higher risk of Alzheimer's disease and so many other problems. Not to mention the effect that they're having on animals and the environment. No, there's every reason why people get seduced by a steak or a burger or the smell of fried chicken. I understand that. However, a plant-based diet is clearly the way to go. And by the way, although we sometimes talk about a vegan movement, the truth is, this vegan movement started millions of years ago. All the great apes, whether it's chimpanzees or gorillas or orangutans or bonobos or human beings, have evolved on either predominantly or exclusively plant-based diets. And human beings had the bad judgment to bring meat into their diet and then dairy and all these things and factory farming and all this stuff, and it's all gotten very seductive. And the results are all around you. 60% of Americans are overweight, lots of them are obese. A third of them have prediabetes or diabetes now. Between a third and a half are going to develop cancer in their lifetime. It's not all due to diet, but a lot of it is. And if we look back a little bit at the diets that are natural for a great ape like us, we get a lesson from it. People can check their genotypes if they wish to, but there isn't any genotype that needs meat. There isn't any genotype that needs dairy. There isn't any genotype that needs eggs. There isn't any genotype that is going to take a great ape and make them a carnivore. When people start a vegan diet, sometimes they're a little awkward with it and they're not quite sure which foods are the best and what proportions, and so sometimes it will be a bit awkward. They might think, I have this big of a steak every day, I should have this much beans to make up for it. So they get kind of gassy as a result. Their intestinal tract isn't quite used to that. So keep the beans a little bit smaller proportions and make sure you cook them really well so that they're digestible. And over time, your body will adapt more. I should say that there are people who have digestive issues for completely other reasons. A vegan diet doesn't mean you're not going to get other issues. You know, when we look at the effects of different foods, there are foods that can have effects on people for all kinds of reasons. You might be allergic to strawberries. There's nothing wrong with strawberries, but for whatever reason, you're allergic to them. And that's true for, say, something like gluten. 99% of people can eat gluten, but about 1% or a little bit less get really sick if they have gluten. They can't have it. And maybe 1 in 10 feels a lot better when they avoid gluten. The other 90% of people, if they avoid gluten, they just get annoyed because gluten-free is kind of more challenging for them. I think the one that does merit some thinking is not zinc. I wouldn't worry about zinc, and I wouldn't worry too much about selenium either, really, to tell you the honest truth. But I do think calcium is something to plan for. When I read the literature, what I see is if a person is getting about 600 milligrams a day, you just can't see any reason why you would need more than that. You really just don't show benefit from going higher than that. You can, but it's not going to make much difference. Where do you find it? The best source, of course, is green leafy vegetables. And that's from broccoli to kale to collards and Brussels sprouts, and squirt them with a little lemon juice to make them good. That's not the only source. They're also in beans, and they're in lots of fortified products and so forth. But if you're below 600, I would get up to about 6, and then I would stop worrying about it. The calcium story is still being written. I do think it's reasonable to not be supplementing a lot of calcium. There are many unknowns. One of which is that when people have atherosclerosis, they end up with calcium in their arteries. And there has been some suggestions that an artificially high calcium intake might feed that same process. Seaweed in general, like nori and wakame, I wish they were a bigger part of our culture. You know, if we had all grown up with it, we'd be healthier people. B12 is essential for health. It's not optional, you really do need it. And it's made by bacteria, not by animals, not by plants. And many people will say, I don't want to take a supplement, that doesn't seem natural. And what I have to say is, you don't live in nature. You live in Omaha, or you live in Dallas, or you live in Portland, or something like that. You don't live the way we lived a million years ago, where there were bacteria in our lives. I'm talking about on our fingers, in our mouths, in the vegetables we pulled from the earth. And also, it may well be that even the gut microbiome has changed in certain ways, so that maybe we would have absorbed some B12 before and we can't now. These are just speculations. But what we know clearly now is that to take a little bit of B12 every day is a good idea. And if you don't, you may well become deficient. If a person is trying to get B12 from a meat source, that's a job, because the body has to have stomach acid first to cleave the B12 off of the protein. And secondly, you need intrinsic factor to absorb it. And for some people that works, but for a lot of people it doesn't. And what I'm saying is that even omnivores can get low in B12. If you go to the store and you get a supplement, whether it's cyanocobalamin or methylcobalamin, either way, it's highly absorbable. That's really the way to go. Now, when you go to the store, you will not find one that has the RDA of 2.4 micrograms. It'll say 500 or 1,000 or 5,000. You think, good grief, you know, that's like way more than you need. So get the smallest one you can find. And online you'll see 100 or 200 micrograms. That's fine, take that. 500, okay. If it's bigger than that, take it every other day, something like that. Human beings evolved in Africa, probably Eastern Africa, and then from there some have gradually migrated to other places, up to Europe, to Asia, to North America and South America. And if your forebears ended up in Fargo, North Dakota, like mine did, there's just not as much sunlight there. If we had the good judgment to have remained in tropical Africa, there would be no shortage of sunshine, and we would have plenty of vitamin D made in our skin. But in more extreme latitudes, you may not be getting so much sunshine, and so a vitamin D supplement is useful from that standpoint. But sunshine has a whole lot of other effects too. It clearly affects mood, and researchers have known for decades that when people live in places where they're dark all the time and they're never getting much sunshine, our moods can plummet. And there are many, many other aspects of this as well. But bottom line, I sometimes wonder if it wouldn't have been better if people had stayed in a more human-friendly environment which was sort of the cradle of humanity. It's just a good practice for everybody. Get out in the sun. Get out in the sun with somebody else. Go for a good walk. You'll get some exercise. You'll get some socialization. You'll be able to forget about your email for a little while. That's all going to be good for you. Skin cancer is a real thing. And it makes good sense to use sunscreen and so forth. And skin aging, these are things that people are rightly concerned about. And I don't know that anyone has figured out the right balance for it. But what people usually recommend is that you want some sun, not an excess of sun. How much? People will typically say something like 20 minutes a day on your face and arms. But of course, we're all different. We have different pigmentation and so forth, and we live in different places. And so that's just kind of a rough number. I wouldn't worry about folic acid ending up in your foods. For many people, that's actually a good thing, and I wouldn't worry about that. But I do think that beta carotene is something that's potentially problematic. And this was really such a shocker because it was very clear decades ago that people who ate more beta carotene rich foods were healthier. They were less likely to have cancer, and so people thought, look at that, the carrot, the sweet potato, that orange pigment is beta carotene, and that's good for us. And it is. But then people thought, to study it, I better make a supplement of just beta carotene, not the carrot, just beta carotene. And those supplements seem to be associated with a higher risk of developing cancer. Now, these studies were done in people who were at high risk for cancer anyway, ex-smokers. But if they got a placebo in the study, they got a certain risk of cancer. If they got beta carotene in the study, their cancer risk was much higher than if they had a placebo. And that knocked everybody back. What we now think is that there are so many different carotenoids. If you take just one, it can suppress the absorption of the others, and it can throw your diet off. The same is probably true with vitamin E. If I go to the store and I get vitamin E, there are 8 different forms of vitamin E. I can get just one in a supplement or 2. And if I'm taking a whole lot of them, of just that supplement, it might suppress the absorption of the other vitamin E forms. If I eat an almond or a walnut, it's got a variety of vitamin E forms in the package that nature had in mind. You know, there are benefits of fasting that you clearly see. I'm talking about people who do like water-only fast. I'm not talking about just taking a day off or 2 days off, but like a water-only fast for a couple of weeks under medical supervision, because it is dangerous and you shouldn't do this on your own. But when people do, you see inflammatory conditions sometimes getting better and people feeling better in many, many ways. But I emphasize it's got to be done under supervision. So it raises the question of why. Why are they better? Is it because they're just not eating the volume of food to give the body time to rest? I don't think we know. I'll tell you what I suspect. What I think is happening is that if the body no longer has to do the energy to assimilate foods, it's not just the question of the volume of the amount of fiber that's going through, it's the actual nutrients themselves. If your body doesn't have to take time to break apart carbohydrates and break apart proteins into amino acids and assimilate them, somehow the body can concentrate on other things. Or if I'm getting rid of everything, then there aren't any sensitizing proteins left in my diet. For many people, they are sensitive to one or another thing, not just dairy or gluten, which are common, but it could be citrus or tomato or potatoes or kind of everyday things that are really well tolerated by most people, but not so well by others. Fasting is a way of saying, all right, clean slate, nothing's going to come into this system. Let's just stop irritating ourselves internally and see if we can get better. We don't really know which is the explanation. We just know that it works. You know, people used to fast intermittently, so to speak, because there weren't 7-Elevens on every corner like there are now. You know, nowadays people eat kind of throughout the day. They might be having not just small meals, but they've got snacks in their desk drawer and they're eating all the time. And to give the body a break is a good thing. Now, my colleague Hannah Kaliova has done studies where people will eat not, say, frequent meals, but maybe only 2 meals in the course of a day. A big breakfast, and then a big meal, and maybe the early afternoon, and that's it. And it's found that for many people, they do very, very well with that kind of approach. Now, there are other people who eat more frequently and do well too. So there are different patterns, but I think they do deserve more study. I do have one caveat, though, and that is there are some people who do intermittent fasting because they heard a radio show saying it was a good idea. And so they say, all right, on Friday and Saturday, I'm going to eat almost nothing. And the rest of the week, I'm going to eat a normal amount. If they anticipate the fast by eating lots of extra foods on the 5 days on, and then they try to fast it off on the 2 other days, they end up getting into a sort of a maladaptive pattern. The idea is to eat normally on the other days and then to give your body a rest on the fast days. There is a term used a lot these days, and that's nutrient-dense foods. You should have a nutrient-dense diet. I don't think that's right. I don't think you need a nutrient-dense diet. I think that term should be eliminated. You're breathing air. Is it oxygen-dense air? No, there's a certain amount of oxygen. There's actually a whole lot more nitrogen in the air, but your body, you have lungs that are designed to live in a certain, a certain oxygen percentage to extract it and use it. If you needed more oxygen because you're flat out on the floor and you've just passed out, there are oxygen tanks that can give you an oxygen-dense atmosphere. But you don't need that. You're a human being. So why should you, as a human being, have a nutrient-dense diet where you're getting a humongous amount of protein and a humongous amount of essential fatty acids and a huge amount of beta-carotene and stuff? Wait. You are a great ape. Your forebears evolved in the woods. And they could eat an apple which has got a lot of water in it. And it's got a lot of fiber in it, or those nutrients, I don't know. But your body recognizes the vitamins, pulls them out, won't overdose you, and that's it. When we talk about a nutrient-dense diet, it's like we're somehow sort of starving for nutrients, and we've got to jam this into our body. Go easy on it. When people go vegan, and all they've done is gone vegan, they've just eliminated the animal products, but they might not have eliminated all processed foods. If they just make that one change, they've done a huge thing. Their cholesterol levels are likely to come down, they're likely to lose weight. That's great. And that's not the end of their exploration, that's kind of the beginning, because after that point they might say, well, maybe I'll stop having so much processed things. Instead of white bread, I'll have whole grain bread, or maybe just whole grains themselves. And they start trying different things. More vegetables in their diet and whatever. When people are still eating maybe some processed foods, but they've managed to get away from the cheese and steak, that's good. That's a good step. There are different tools that we use. The Meatless Mondays are a great idea for validating the idea that you don't need meat. And so if a company says we're going to have Meatless Mondays, and people who have never had a day without meat in their whole lives suddenly realize that A, other people do it, it's good, it tastes good, that's good. However, for a person who really wants to make a behavioral change, there is nothing like getting the animal products off your plate completely and following a healthy diet, because when that happens, you do discover benefits that you're not going to discover from just doing it intermittently. And people will say, wait, moderation in all things. That is a really abused phrase. Let's say, for example, my 7-year-old daughter loves broccoli, eats broccoli. Dad, I just want some more servings of broccoli. Okay, good, that's great. Would you like some beans and some fruit? No, just broccoli. Well, broccoli's good for you, sweetheart, but there's other things that you can have too. Or loves playing the violin. After about 4 hours, I say, sweetheart, you might want to study something or go to the movies or something like that. No, I'm just doing violin. Moderation makes good sense for healthy things. You want to have some, but not necessarily too much. But if my daughter says, Dad, I'm going to do a line of cocaine because I saw it in a movie that it's kind of cool. And I'm not going to do too much. I'm just going to have a moderate amount. Or, Dad, I'm going to have a couple of cigarettes today, not much. Wait a minute. Moderation does not apply to unhealthy things. Hope I'm being clear. Moderation is good for healthy things, some vegetables, some fruits, some whole grains, some exercise. But you shouldn't be exercising 23.5 hours a day. Some sleep. Get 8 hours, but after 9, 10, get up. There's stuff to do. When it comes to something that's going to hurt you, moderation is what kills people. I'll just have some cheese. And you just develop some atherosclerosis and a bit of Alzheimer's and some cancer and you die. I'm going to have some cocaine. I'm going to have some this, some that, some tobacco. Those are words that really hurt people. But they're used to rationalize cravings and addictions and things that people can sell.